AITA for telling my sister she's the reason her kids don't want to come around? Family has always been at the center of my life. I'm the proud mother of 4 kids, each at different stages of becoming their own person. My daughter Kaylee, my youngest, is about to graduate high school and move on to college. And then I have 2 sons already in college, navigating their way through their studies and finding their own paths. My oldest, Jerry, graduated college last year and decided to move back in with me while he saves up for his next big step. Having them all around, even if just intermittently, fills my home with a sense of continuity and connection. As they grow and explore their independence, I want them to know they always have a place to land. Family means something different for each of us, and I've always believed in creating a space that feels welcoming and safe. I didn't grow up in an environment where things like comfort and warmth were taken for granted. We were raised to be tough, self-reliant, and prepared to face the world on our own if necessary. My sister Sarah, who's 2 years older than me, internalized that message differently than I did. She's always taken a more tough love approach to raising her kids, firmly believing that pushing them to stand on their own from a young age will prepare them best for the real world. She has 3 kids herself, a daughter still in high school, a son in college, and another son working on his master's degree. I can tell she's proud of how independent they've become, though it sometimes feels like there's a gulf between them. And then there's my youngest sister, Jen. She and I are closer in parenting styles, and we're often on the same page about what it means to create a supportive family environment. Like me, she's focused on being there for her kids and giving them the security of knowing they can always come home, no matter what. Together, we balance Sarah's more rigid approach, supporting each other's choices without needing to impose our beliefs on one another, most of the time. Anyway, but when it comes to family values, Sarah and I have always clashed. Over the years, she's openly criticized my choice to coddle my kids, accusing me of raising them to be dependent. She sees my approach as soft and even enabling, while I see hers as uncomfortably distant, especially now that her kids rarely come home to visit. Still, I try to respect her choices, knowing we all have our own ways of parenting, shaped by our different experiences and perspectives. Even when I disagree, I hold back because I understand that our approaches stem from the same place, a desire to see our kids succeed and thrive. That was the unspoken agreement we had. Or so I thought. But lately, our differences have become impossible to ignore, pushing our already strained relationship to its breaking point. What started as small comments here and there have escalated into full-blown criticisms. As I navigate my own path as a parent, Sarah seems determined to challenge every decision I make, whether it's about supporting Jerry as he saves for a home or getting Kaylee ready for her next big step. The divide between us feels wider than ever. But I've always believed in letting my kids know they can rely on me. That family is more than just a place, it's a constant. Something they can turn to in any moment of doubt or difficulty. Yet Sarah sees this as babying them, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to ignore her judgments. Sarah and I have always taken different approaches to parenting, but as our kids have grown older, our differences have become more pronounced. For Sarah, parenting is about instilling independence and resilience as early as possible. She made it clear to her children that, as soon as they graduated high school, they'd be expected to start paying rent if they wanted to keep their rooms. This rule wasn't negotiable, it was a condition she set from the beginning. A way to teach them the realities of adult life. She believed it would make them stronger, more prepared for the challenges they'd face outside the walls of her home. When she first mentioned this rule to me, I tried to keep my reaction in check. I know Sarah feels that her approach is the right one, and she sees her parenting as a blueprint for how to raise responsible adults. But as someone who's taken a very different route, I couldn't help but feel that her strict approach was more likely to create resentment than resilience. It felt harsh, even cold, and I worried that it would drive her kids away, making them feel like they were being forced to choose between having a home and embracing independence. I remember suggesting, as gently as I could, that this rule might have the opposite effect of what she intended, that it might create a barrier rather than a bond between her and her children. I told her that while independence was important, It was equally important for her kids to know that they could rely on her if they needed to. But she quickly shut down my advice, telling me that she'd made her decision and that I should respect her parenting style. To her, my suggestion that she was being too rigid was just another sign that I was soft on my own kids. I let it go, knowing that arguing wouldn't change her mind. It's been years since she first set those rules, and I've seen the effects. Her kids are respectful, polite, and responsible, but there's a distance between them and Sarah that's hard to ignore. They rarely come around unless it's a holiday or some family obligation. And even then, it feels like they're visiting out of duty rather than a desire to be there. I'm sure they love her, but their interactions feel formal, lacking the warmth and ease that I'd want with my own kids. It's painful to watch, and I wonder if Sarah ever notices or if she just tells herself that this is the cost of raising independent children. In contrast, I've chosen to make my home a place where my kids feel welcomed, supported, and unconditionally loved. I don't have a rent rule, and I don't expect them to contribute financially to live with me. Instead, I encourage them to focus on their studies, careers, and future goals, knowing that I'll be here to support them along the way. Jerry's living with me now, and while he helps out with groceries and cooking because he wants to, I'd never require it. For me, it's more important that he's able to save up for a house, to build a foundation for his life without the pressure of rent hanging over him. I see it as my way of giving him a head start, a chance to make choices that aren't driven solely by financial necessity. I can see how Sarah might view my approach as coddling, and I know she thinks I'm setting my kids up for failure. But my children are thriving, they're pursuing their goals, succeeding academically, and building lives they're proud of. They know they can come to me for help without feeling like it comes with strings attached. To me, that's what family is for, a place where they can return to, no matter how old they are or where life takes them. Sarah doesn't see it that way, and I've tried to respect that. But it's hard not to feel judged when she criticizes my choices. And as much as I try to ignore her comments, they linger, making me question whether I'm being too lenient. Yet every time I see the closeness I share with my kids, I feel reassured that my approach, while different from hers, is working for us. A few weeks ago, Sarah, Jen, and I decided to spend a day shopping together to catch up. It had been a while since we'd done anything like this, and I was hoping for a day of laughter and bonding, a break from the family tensions simmering under the surface. We strolled through the aisles, chatting about work, family, and our plans for the upcoming holiday season. It felt like old times until a simple purchase sparked a new wave of tension. While browsing the seasonal section, I spotted some items that would be perfect for Halloween baskets I'd seen people making online. I thought it'd be a fun treat for my kids. Even though they're grown, it's little gestures like this that I love doing. It's my way of reminding them that they're thought of and loved, no matter their age. I started grabbing a few things: cute mugs, soft blankets, candy, and gift cards. Jen saw what I was doing and, inspired, decided to put together similar baskets for her kids. Then I noticed Sarah watching us. Her eyebrows raised. "What are you doing with all that?" she asked, her tone laced with disapproval. I explained that I was putting together Halloween baskets for my kids, just as a fun surprise. Jen chimed in, saying she loved the idea and thought it would bring a little extra joy to the holiday. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Isn't that a bit much?" she said. "Aren't they a little old for Halloween baskets? You two are just babying your kids. When are they going to grow up if you keep treating them like children?" Her words stung. It wasn't the first time she'd criticized my parenting, but something about her tone this time felt sharper, like she couldn't contain her disdain. I tried to brush it off, responding as lightly as I could. "I just like doing nice things for them. It's fun for me, and they enjoy it." Jen nodded in agreement, offering a supportive smile. But I could see that my answer hadn't satisfied Sarah. She shook her head, muttering something about how unnecessary it was and how we were spoiling our kids. The tension hung in the air, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I let it go. The last thing I wanted was for a simple shopping trip to turn into another debate about parenting. We finished our shopping with Sarah mostly silent, her mood noticeably colder. It was as though my small gesture had become an indictment of her own choices. A reminder of the things she chose not to do for her kids. I could sense her frustration building, even if she wasn't saying it out loud. When I looked over at Jen, I could tell she felt the same tension. She gave me a sympathetic look, and I knew she understood. Jen has always been supportive of the little things I do for my kids. She's the kind of parent who, like me, finds joy in making her kids feel special, even in small ways. By the time we left the store, I was drained. What should have been a simple outing had turned into another reminder of how different our approaches to parenting were. As we headed home, I wondered why Sarah felt so compelled to criticize every choice I made. As though my actions were somehow undermining her own. In my mind, parenting didn't need to be this competitive, and I couldn't understand why she seemed to see it that way. I tried to shake off the interaction, telling myself that it was just her way of reinforcing her beliefs. But her words lingered, leaving me feeling defensive, even a little guilty. Was I truly babying my kids by doing something small and thoughtful for them? Part of me felt silly for even questioning myself. But her criticism had struck a nerve, and I couldn't ignore the tension brewing between us. Looking back, I should have known that this was just the beginning of a larger conflict. One that had been building for years and was now creeping into every interaction we had. Sarah seemed determined to make her feelings known, no matter the occasion, and I realized that it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. Later that evening, Sarah came over for dinner. It had become a bit of a tradition for her to join us every now and then. But after the tension during our shopping trip, I wasn't entirely sure how the night would go. My son Jerry, who's been living with me since he graduated college, had prepared the meal. Jerry has a knack for cooking, he enjoys it, and he's more than happy to take over in the kitchen whenever he's around. That night, he made his signature pasta, and the house was filled with the warm, familiar smells that made it feel like home. As we sat down to eat, Sarah looked around, taking in the food spread across the table and the easygoing atmosphere of my home. The conversation started off light enough, but soon, she couldn't hold back her opinions any longer. Glancing over at Jerry, she cleared her throat and asked, "So, when are you planning on moving out, Jerry?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Jerry, always polite, answered that he was planning to move out when he felt financially ready, explaining that he was saving up to buy his own place. He's been incredibly responsible about it, setting aside most of his earnings while contributing to the household in his own way. But Sarah didn't seem satisfied. "He should at least be paying rent," she said, turning to me. "You're letting him live here without any real responsibility. You're holding him back from becoming independent." I felt a wave of frustration rise in me. I'd heard these criticisms from her before, but this time, I couldn't brush them off so easily. I told her that, in my view, my role as a parent was to support my children's goals, not to rush them out of the house. Jerry is saving for a future that many young adults struggle to achieve, a home of his own, and if I could give him the time and space to accomplish that, why wouldn't I? Sarah shook her head, clearly unimpressed. "You're spoiling him. You know, you're not doing him any favors by letting him live here rent-free. Life isn't going to be that easy, and the sooner he learns that, the better." Her words felt like an accusation, as if I were somehow failing my children by giving them a little extra help. I tried to stay calm and explain that I didn't see it as spoiling. Jerry works hard, and he contributes to the household in ways that make a real difference. He pays for groceries, cooks meals, and takes care of things around the house. More than that, I didn't want him to feel the same financial pressures I'd faced at his age. Barely scraping by and sacrificing long-term goals for immediate needs. I wanted him to have a head start, a sense of security that he could build on. Sarah wasn't convinced. She scoffed and looked away, dismissing my explanation as though I were naive or misguided. I could feel the resentment building in the room, but I didn't want to let it ruin the evening. I reminded myself that my decisions were based on what I believed was best for my children, and I didn't owe anyone an apology for that. Then, as Jerry and my daughter Kaylee passed through the living room, I mentioned that they should start working on their Christmas lists soon, as I'd seen some early sales and wanted to plan ahead. It was a light-hearted moment, A simple comment that brought smiles to their faces. But for Sarah, it was the final straw. "You're ridiculous," she snapped. "They're too old for Christmas lists. You're raising them to be lazy and entitled if you keep indulging them like this. You're not preparing them for the real world at all." I was stunned by her harshness. I saw my kids' faces fall, and I could see Jerry's frustration growing. But I quickly stepped in before he could respond. I couldn't let her disrespect them like that. The protective instinct I'd always felt for my children took over, and I looked Sarah straight in the eye. "Lazy? Entitled?" I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "My kids are anything but that. Jerry graduated with honors, has a solid job, and is actively saving for a house. Kaylee is in the top 10% of her class, preparing for college. They're hardworking, responsible, and kind. Just because I support them doesn't mean I'm failing them." My voice shook slightly as I continued, feeling years of pent-up frustration bubbling over. "If you really want to know why your own kids barely come around, maybe you should ask yourself if it's because they feel unsupported, or even unwelcome. What kind of mother expects her kids to pay rent just to keep a room in her house while they're in school?" The words tumbled out before I could stop myself. Raw and unfiltered, I knew I'd crossed a line. But in that moment, I couldn't hold back. Sarah looked shocked, her face pale as she stared at me. And without another word, she stood up and left the house. I sat there, feeling a mix of anger, guilt, and relief. My heart was racing, but I knew deep down that I'd only spoken the truth. I wasn't going to apologize for supporting my kids. And I wasn't going to let anyone, even my sister, tear them down. They deserved better, and so did I. But as the quiet settled in after Sarah left, I couldn't ignore the sense that our relationship might never be the same. Later that night, the fallout from our argument spread quickly through the family. I'd barely had a chance to process the dinner confrontation when my phone lit up with messages from our family group chat. Sarah had wasted no time diving in to share her side of the story. She didn't hold back, portraying herself as a concerned sister who'd simply been trying to offer some real-world advice when I lashed out and insulted her parenting. According to her, I'd gone too far, crossing a line and judging choices that weren't mine to judge. As the messages poured in, I could feel my frustration building again. Sarah had painted a version of events that twisted my words, making it seem as though I'd attacked her out of nowhere. But before I could respond, my youngest sister Jen chimed in, backing me up. Jen recounted what she'd seen and shared her perspective, reminding everyone that Sarah had repeatedly criticized my choices long before I'd finally spoken up. She pointed out that Sarah's advice had crossed a line, suggesting that what happened at dinner was the result of years of unspoken tension finally coming to a head. I was grateful for Jen's support, but it was my mother's reaction that really caught my attention. She rarely involved herself in our sibling arguments, preferring to let us work things out on our own. But this time, she weighed in, addressing Sarah directly. She reminded Sarah that she'd often bristled when anyone had commented on her strict parenting style, insisting that she had a right to raise her kids her way. My mother went on to say that it wasn't fair to criticize my choices when she expected others to respect hers. She gently suggested that maybe it was time for Sarah to step back and accept that we all had different ways of showing love and support to our families. Reading my mother's message brought a sense of validation I hadn't realized I needed. While my relationship with my mom has always been solid, I hadn't expected her to step into the fray like this. Her words made me feel seen and understood. And for a moment, I felt a swell of pride. Maybe I wasn't as wrong as Sarah made me feel. Maybe, just maybe, my choices weren't something to be ashamed of. But, as expected, Sarah didn't take my mother's words well. She responded with a brief, heated message before abruptly leaving the group chat, cutting herself off from the family conversation entirely. Her exit was her way of saying she was done, refusing to entertain any other perspectives. It was classic Sarah, leaving things in anger instead of staying to work through them. And while I felt a hint of sadness, I also knew that I couldn't continue bending myself into knots to make her feel validated in her choices. After Sarah left the chat, I felt a mixture of emotions. Part of me was relieved that the conversation had stopped before things got even more heated. But another part of me was unsettled, wondering if I'd really done the right thing by speaking up. Had I pushed her too far? Was I wrong for confronting her in my own home, even if she had criticized me first? The questions nagged at me, leaving a bitter taste despite the family's show of support. In the quiet of the evening, I reread the group chat, finding comfort in the fact that my mother and Jen had my back. Their messages reassured me that I wasn't alone in my perspective, that I wasn't the only one who saw the flaw in Sarah's unyielding style. But it also made me realize that our relationship might be more fractured than I'd ever anticipated. With Sarah cutting off communication, I wondered if this was the end of any meaningful connection between us. As I set my phone down, I resolved to give it some time, letting Sarah decide if she wanted to mend things or keep her distance. I couldn't control her reaction, nor could I change her perception of my parenting. What I could do, however, was stay true to my values and continue supporting my kids in the ways I believed were best. In the end, I knew I'd spoken up not just for myself, but for my children, and that, to me, made it all worthwhile. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking deeply about what had happened with Sarah. Her words had left a mark, and as much as I tried to shake them off, they lingered, weaving themselves into my thoughts. Her criticism made me question if I was really babying my kids. If I was setting them up to be unprepared for the challenges of life by providing them with a level of support she considered excessive. But then I'd look around my home, at the closeness I shared with my kids, and I'd feel reassured that I was doing something right, even if it didn't align with her views. One thing I couldn't ignore was the core difference in our parenting philosophies. For me, being a parent means offering a sense of security, creating a home where my children feel loved, supported, and free to pursue their ambitions without the fear of financial stress hanging over them. It's about being their safety net, especially during these formative years, while they're still finding their footing. I don't see it as coddling, I see it as giving them room to grow and make thoughtful choices. I know that Sarah's approach stems from her belief in tough love, an upbringing that expects children to face the world head-on, relying on themselves the moment they turn 18. It's the way our parents raised us, the way we were taught to handle hardship. I understand her perspective, and I can even respect it to an extent. But to me, our parents' approach wasn't the only way, and I had made the conscious choice to give my children something different, a sense of stability. A place where they know they're supported even as they make mistakes and figure things out. I kept coming back to the idea that support doesn't have to mean dependence. My kids are responsible, ambitious, and hardworking. Jerry, for instance, is saving meticulously for a home of his own, working diligently, and taking on responsibilities voluntarily, like buying groceries and cooking meals. Kaylee is excelling in school and planning for her future with excitement and focus. I don't feel they're entitled or lazy, as Sarah had suggested. Rather, I see them as people who are grateful for the support they have and are making the most of it. Still, Sarah's words had left me questioning whether my choices were weakening them in some way. Was I overcompensating for the hard times I'd had growing up, trying to shield them from struggles that might actually help them grow? There was a part of me that couldn't entirely dismiss her concerns, no matter how harshly they were delivered. I thought about moments in my own life where struggle had shaped me. Times when I'd had no choice but to figure things out on my own. Those experiences were valuable, and maybe Sarah saw my refusal to impose similar challenges on my children as denying them the strength they might gain from independence. But I knew, deep down, that I wanted to be the kind of parent who gave her kids the freedom to choose their own paths, without unnecessary hurdles. I wanted them to look back and remember a home that was a source of love, not a place that they had to fight to stay in. For me, family was about acceptance and support, not rigid expectations. And as I considered the distance growing between Sarah and me, I wondered if we'd ever be able to bridge our differing philosophies. I hoped she could see that my choices weren't about proving her wrong but about embracing a version of parenthood that felt authentic to me. I didn't need my children to face financial pressure in order to learn responsibility. I wanted them to understand that they had a family that believed in them, that their home would always be a place where they were encouraged to dream big without fear. Reflecting on this, I felt a renewed confidence in my approach. Yes, My parenting style was different from Sarah's, but I saw firsthand the happiness and confidence it fostered in my kids. They were thriving, and to me, that was proof enough that I was on the right track. I knew they were prepared for the world, not because they'd been forced to fend for themselves, but because they'd grown up with a foundation of love and support that allowed them to face life's challenges from a place of strength. In the end, I realized that I didn't need Sarah's approval to feel validated. What mattered was the bond I shared with my children. The sense of pride I felt watching them become independent, kind, and responsible adults. Family, I believed, could mean a place of safety and security. A home where they always felt valued. And if Sarah couldn't understand that, then maybe it was a boundary I'd have to accept, even if it meant accepting a distance in our relationship. After all that had happened with Sarah, I felt the need to check in with my kids. I wanted to be sure that, whatever Sarah had said, my children knew why I chose to support them the way I did. I wanted them to understand that my choices were intentional, that they were rooted in love, not an attempt to shelter them from reality. So, one evening, I sat down with Jerry and later spoke with Kaylee. The conversations ended up being more revealing than I had expected, offering me insights and reassurance that went deeper than I'd hoped. Jerry, as always, was straightforward. He'd been there during the argument with Sarah, and I knew he'd been frustrated on my behalf. He's a good kid, responsible, driven, and incredibly perceptive. As we talked, he shared his gratitude for the opportunity to live at home rent-free while he saved up. He told me he understood that this wasn't a permanent arrangement, that I wasn't trying to prevent him from becoming independent but was instead giving him the chance to start his adult life on solid ground. "Mom," he said, "I know you don't have to do this. And I don't take it for granted. Having this time to save and get myself together without drowning in bills means everything to me." His words struck a chord. He explained that the support I provided allowed him to focus on his goals without the constant stress of making ends meet. Something he knew would be his reality soon enough. For him, this wasn't coddling, it was an opportunity to make responsible decisions without rushing into anything out of desperation. Hearing him say that made me feel a wave of relief. It was exactly what I'd hoped my support would provide, a safety net that helped him make the transition into adulthood without unnecessary struggle. I realized that I didn't need to doubt my approach if it was genuinely helping my kids prepare for the future they wanted. Seeing Jerry so appreciative and understanding reassured me that I was giving him the best start I could. Later, I sat down with Kaylee, who was busy finishing up her college applications. She's ambitious and mature, with big dreams and a strong sense of purpose. But she also has a softness that reminds me of myself at her age. When I brought up the argument with Sarah and mentioned my concerns, she looked at me with a gentle smile. "Mom, I know you're just trying to help us," she said, her tone patient and understanding. "Honestly, I see what you're doing, and it doesn't make me feel entitled. It makes me feel lucky to have a mom who cares enough to let us figure things out without pressure." She went on to tell me that she felt more prepared for college and beyond precisely because she knew she didn't have to worry about being on her own the moment she turned 18. She felt encouraged to take risks, to pursue her passions, and to put her best effort into her education because she had a solid foundation. Kaylee's words meant the world to me. They helped me see that the support I offered wasn't just a matter of comfort. It was something that made my kids feel secure and empowered. She told me that knowing she could always come home, no matter where life took her, gave her a sense of confidence she might not have otherwise. It was exactly what I wanted for her, the freedom to pursue her dreams without the weight of financial worries crushing her spirit. These conversations with my kids gave me a new perspective on the criticisms I'd faced. It wasn't just about parenting styles or philosophies, it was about the impact my choices were having on my children's lives. My support allowed them to build a foundation, one that would help them face life's challenges from a place of security and strength. I realized that, no matter what Sarah or anyone else thought, my priority was my kids' happiness and success. And from what they shared with me, I could see that my support was giving them the confidence and resources they needed to thrive. By the end of these talks, I felt a renewed sense of pride in my decisions. My children didn't see me as an enabler or someone keeping them from independence, they saw me as a source of support. A foundation they could rely on as they prepared to navigate the world on their own. They understood that my choices came from a place of love and intention, not from a desire to shelter them from reality. These moments with Jerry and Kaylee were priceless. They reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Why I continued to open my home and my heart to my children no matter their age. I knew there would always be people who didn't understand, who thought I was doing my kids a disservice by not forcing them out into the world on my timeline. But those voices didn't matter anymore. My kids felt supported, empowered, and ready for their futures. And to me, that was all the validation I needed. Not long after my conversations with Jerry and Kaylee, my sister Sarah showed up at my door unexpectedly. I hadn't heard from her since the argument at dinner, so seeing her standing there took me by surprise. I could see the tension in her face. Her arms crossed tightly, her gaze steady but guarded. I invited her in, bracing myself for whatever confrontation she was bringing with her. We sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. After a few moments of uncomfortable silence, Sarah finally spoke. "I think we need to talk about what happened," she said, her voice tight. I nodded, ready to listen, though unsure of what exactly she hoped to resolve. She started by explaining that she felt attacked during our last conversation. That my words about her parenting had felt like a personal insult. A judgment she wasn't prepared to hear from her own sister. I listened, genuinely wanting to understand her perspective. I knew my comments had hit a nerve, but from my point of view, they had been a reaction to her relentless criticisms of my choices. Not an unprovoked attack. I told her as much, carefully explaining that my outburst had come from years of feeling judged and belittled for how I chose to raise my children. I wanted her to know that it wasn't about undermining her values but about defending mine. But Sarah wasn't interested in nuance. She shook her head and launched into a familiar critique of my approach, insisting that my kids would grow up unprepared, spoiled by an environment that gave them too much, too easily. Her tone was almost pitying, as if she couldn't believe I'd let my children have it so easy, without expecting them to pay their own way the moment they could. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own emotions in check. I reminded her that my children weren't entitled or lazy, as she seemed to believe. They were hardworking and responsible, doing well in school and life because they knew they had a support system they could rely on. I shared some of what Jerry and Kaylee had told me, their gratitude for the opportunity to focus on building a solid foundation without the immediate financial pressures she'd imposed on her own kids. But as I spoke, I could see her face harden, the disbelief in her eyes plain as day. It was clear that she wasn't interested in seeing my side. To her, my support was indulgent, enabling my kids to avoid the realities of adulthood. "You're just making excuses," she said, her tone sharper now. "They're going to hit a wall one day and realize that life isn't as forgiving as you've made it seem." Her words stung, but I forced myself to remain calm, reminding myself of what my kids had shared with me, the strength they felt from having a supportive home. Finally, I looked her in the eye and said, "Sarah, I understand that you see things differently, but my kids are thriving in their own way, and I don't believe that giving them a foundation to build on is holding them back. I respect that you've raised your kids the way you thought was best, but I need you to respect that I'm doing the same." My voice was calm, but firm, and I hoped she could hear the finality in my words. I was done justifying myself. There was a long pause, and I could see that my answer hadn't satisfied her. She looked away, shaking her head as if I just didn't understand. "Fine," she said finally, her voice flat. "You do what you want. But don't expect me to sit around and watch you ruin them. Don't say I didn't warn you." With that, she stood up and walked toward the door, leaving me stunned by the hostility in her words. As she left, I felt a deep sadness settle over me. I knew that our relationship had changed, maybe irreparably. Her refusal to accept or respect my choices had driven a wedge between us, one that couldn't be easily bridged. I was hurt, not only by her words but by her unwillingness to see past her own beliefs and understand that my choices weren't a threat to hers. I stood by the door for a while after she left, a mix of emotions swirling inside me, sadness, frustration, and a touch of regret. But as painful as the encounter had been, I also felt a sense of relief. I'd defended my choices, set a boundary, and refused to let her judgments define my relationship with my kids. For the first time, I felt like I'd truly stood my ground. In that moment, I accepted that Sarah and I might never see eye to eye, and that our relationship might always be tinged with this tension. But I also knew that I couldn't live my life under her scrutiny or change my parenting to fit her approval. My home was a place of warmth, support, and stability for my kids, and I was committed to keeping it that way. As I closed the door, I resolved to move forward with confidence, knowing that I'd made my choices for the right reasons. I was choosing my children's happiness, stability, and future over anyone else's opinion, even if that meant creating a little distance from family. And while it was a painful realization, it was also liberating. In that moment, I knew that my loyalty was where it should be, with the family I had built and the values I held dear. In the days following Sarah's visit, I began to feel the ripple effects of our argument spread through the family. My mother reached out, concerned and clearly trying to mediate. She had heard Sarah's side, and though she didn't openly take sides, I could tell she wasn't happy with how things had escalated. In her mind, our conflict reflected poorly on the family, and she wished we could just find common ground. But this wasn't a simple disagreement to brush off, and I wasn't willing to compromise on the values I held dear. Even if it disappointed her, my mother reminded me of the sacrifices she and my father had made for us, often under difficult circumstances, instilling a work ethic and a sense of self-sufficiency from a young age. She asked why I couldn't find a middle ground with Sarah, noting that family meant supporting each other even when we disagreed. I could tell she was trying to make peace, but her words only added to my inner conflict. I began to question if, by setting boundaries with Sarah, I was somehow failing my own family values. Was I letting my loyalty to my parenting choices come at the cost of my relationship with my sister? My father weighed in too, albeit in his usual straightforward manner. He wasn't much for delicate conversations, so when he reached out, his message was blunt. Family has to stick together, even if that means making some tough choices. Your sister needs you to understand her, just like she needs to understand you. Don't let this be what drives you apart. His words were well-intentioned, but they landed like a subtle reprimand, a reminder of the family loyalty that had been drilled into us from childhood. He saw my refusal to compromise with Sarah as a personal stance that was hurting the family as a whole. Hearing this from my parents left me with an uncomfortable question. Was I wrong for holding my ground so firmly? I knew my intentions were good, but in standing by my parenting style, I was actively widening the rift between Sarah and me, pulling the family dynamic into a more fractured state. My parents seemed to think that compromise, in some form, was necessary to preserve family unity, and I understood where they were coming from. But the idea of giving in to Sarah's rigid views, of letting her critique my choices without defending my own values, felt like abandoning the principles that shaped how I wanted to support my children. I realized that my parents saw family loyalty as the highest priority, an obligation that transcended personal choices. To them, standing with family, even when it meant swallowing our pride or compromising, was simply what we did. I admired their commitment, but I also couldn't ignore the ways in which that loyalty had caused tension and resentment, especially when it meant ignoring one's own values to maintain peace. My parents' perspective was rooted in a belief that family was everything, even if it meant bending or sacrificing one's own boundaries. As much as I respected their viewpoint, I began to understand that my own definition of loyalty had evolved. For me, loyalty to my family didn't mean silently absorbing criticism or changing my approach to please others. It meant standing by the choices I'd made for my children, choices that I genuinely believed were setting them up for success. My loyalty wasn't just to the idea of family but to the people my children were becoming. I wanted them to grow up with the confidence that their home would always be a place of unconditional support, not a place where they had to justify their presence or prove their independence before they were ready. Reflecting on this, I started to feel more secure in my decision to hold my ground with Sarah. I knew it might mean that our relationship would remain strained, that she might never accept my choices, and that my parents might continue to see my stance as a disruption to the family harmony they valued so deeply. But I couldn't let the weight of their expectations dictate how I lived my life or how I raised my children. In a way, this experience was helping me redefine what loyalty meant for me. I realized that I could be loyal to my family without sacrificing my values. That I could respect my parents' wishes without letting them override my own convictions. It was a difficult balance, but one I knew I had to find if I wanted to stay true to myself and still honor the family that had shaped me. In the end, I accepted that my choices might disappoint some people, even those closest to me. But I also knew that the foundation I was building for my children was something I believed in wholeheartedly. My loyalty to them, to their futures, their stability, and their happiness, was a commitment I couldn't compromise, even if it meant creating a little distance from family members who couldn't understand. And while it was a painful realization, it was also one that brought me a deep sense of peace. For perhaps the first time, I felt at ease with the choices I was making, knowing they were grounded in love, respect, and a loyalty that was as much to myself as it was to my children. As the days stretched on, the weight of my decision and the fallout with Sarah slowly began to settle. The dust was clearing, and though the air felt heavy with unresolved tension, I felt a surprising calm inside. For so long, I'd wrestled with the need for my family's approval, balancing my loyalty to them with the instincts I had for raising my kids. Now, for the first time, I felt like I could release some of that pressure and just breathe. I thought often about the version of family loyalty that my parents had instilled in us, the belief that family should always come first, even at personal cost. In their eyes, compromise and unity were virtues, something to aspire to no matter the circumstances. But after everything that had happened, I realized that my loyalty to family wasn't the same as theirs. To me, loyalty wasn't about blending my choices with theirs until they were satisfied. It was about honoring the family I was building, the values I held dear, and the foundation I wanted to create for my children. As much as I loved my family, I couldn't let their vision of loyalty eclipse my own. I knew that holding true to my parenting style was the right thing for me. Even if Sarah, and perhaps my parents, might never understand, I had come to terms with the fact that they might always see my choices as overly generous, even indulgent, a weakness rather than the strength I believed it to be. I realized that Sarah and I might never find common ground on this, and that was something I would have to accept. In the weeks that followed, I decided to step back from trying to make everyone understand my perspective. I wasn't giving up on my relationship with Sarah or my parents, but I was letting go of the need for their validation. I would continue to be there for family gatherings, birthdays, and celebrations, showing up as the sister and daughter they knew me to be, but without surrendering my own beliefs. If Sarah chose to bring up my choices, I would listen, but I wouldn't let it unsettle me the way it once had. I realized that I could be present without being defenseless, that I could listen without feeling the need to justify. And in choosing this path, I felt a sense of calm and strength return to me. I knew that I was protecting the life and values I wanted to give my children. If that meant a bit of distance between me and my sister, then that was a distance I could live with. My kids sensed the shift too. They noticed the calm that had replaced the tension I once felt when dealing with my family's expectations. Jerry, as perceptive as ever, told me one day that he felt lucky to have a parent who was willing to go against the grain for his and his siblings' sakes. Hearing him say that, seeing the pride in his eyes, reaffirmed the choice I had made. I was showing my kids that love, loyalty, and support could look different from what others believed, and that it was okay to honor those beliefs even if it meant standing alone. In the end, I had chosen a loyalty that looked different but felt right, a loyalty that didn't demand constant compromise or validation. My family might not understand that, and Sarah might always see my choices as too lenient, but I had made peace with that reality. This was my journey, and these were my choices to make. As I looked around my home, filled with laughter, warmth, and the people I loved most, I felt at peace. I had chosen the path that aligned with my values, that honored my children's well-being, and that allowed me to be the kind of parent I believed they needed. And in this newfound clarity, I knew that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, surrounded by the love and loyalty I had chosen to build. For me, that was enough.